interested in demystifying the process so that it's repeatable, that people have within their reach, some tools to begin to apply to their lives. So I think one of the things is that for the most part, people stay the same in their life. They're thinking the same thoughts, they're making the same choices, they're doing the same things, they're reliving the same experiences, and those experiences create the same feelings and the same emotions. And as long as that's the same, their biology is the same. So the fundamental question that I started to ask is if we could get people to retreat from their lives for 1 week and to remove the constant stimulation in their external environment that reminds them of who they think they are as a personality, as they separate themselves from all the different people and places and things in their life, and give them the information and knowledge, and combine a little quantum physics with neuroscience and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics. If they begin to think differently, if they begin to make different choices, if they begin to do different things, if they begin to create new experiences that produce new feelings and new emotions, is that information relevant enough to begin to change their biology? And what we see is that people that actually do this, over time, they begin to change their gene expression, they begin to change their immune regulation, they begin to change how their brain works, how their heart works. And they begin to cause all kinds of different metabolic changes taking place on a cellular level. And I think the most important part about it, Lynn, is that people need to know that this is the truth. And when people start to realize that it is the truth, then they begin to take their power back and say, yes, I may need a medication, I may need a supplement, I may need to do exercise. Those are all the things that we do in our lifestyle. But even if you do those things in your lifestyle and you're still the same, it's highly possible that your healing will take a longer amount of time. So that's one of the things. Yeah, so it seems like there's the known self, the aspect of ourselves that we know. And then there's an aspect of ourselves called the unknown self. And that transcendental moment a lot of times is that moment where you have a perspective that's greater than the known self. And working somebody up into that state where they're no longer in separation is one of the most challenging things in the healing process, because unfortunately the diagnosis, the disease, the trauma, the news somehow causes the person to have a moment in time where they feel altered. In other words, when they get the diagnosis from the doctor, they have a moment where there's a change in their internal state. They feel fear, they feel sadness. That moment is altering their internal state. And the more altered they're inside of themselves, the more they pay attention to what's causing it outside of them. And the brain takes a snapshot, and that's a long-term memory. So that moment in time then, from the time they get their diagnosis, is a moment that begins to brand that moment neurologically in their brain and begins to send a strong chemical signal called an emotion to their body. And so then now they're in separation. They're going to wait for their healing to take place in order to feel joy, in order to feel gratitude, in order to feel reborn again, or in an altered state. And that kind of idealism of separation is waiting for something outside of ourselves to change in order for us to feel better inside of ourselves, to take away the emptiness, the separation, or the lack. And when we move into a transcendental state, something unique happens. We begin to feel the emotions of the event before it actually changes in our outer environment. In other words, the person who moves into that state of connection, that state of ecstasy, that state of insight, the moment they notice that change inside of them, without an experience outside of them, their body is so objective that it does not know the difference between the real life experience that would be creating that emotion and the emotion the person's experiencing by thought alone. So if the environment signals the gene according to epigenetics, and it does, and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, in a sense, that person is signaling the gene ahead of the environment, and genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of the body, and the expression of proteins is the expression of life. So the person in one moment, the amplitude of the emotion of connection or ecstasy or wholeness or bliss or whatever they're feeling tends to be greater than the betrayal or the diagnosis that created the fear in the first place. And that tends to reorganize the circuitry in the brain and sends a new chemical signal to the body. And sometimes it's profound enough that literally it begins to upregulate genes for the expression of health, and it begins to downregulate those genes that have to do with the disease that the person is facing. And the unique part about it is that it's happening in real time. In other words, the experience that the person is having in that moment is literally changing them. So that means then it's no longer their change is taking place in a lifestyle, which is matter to matter, avoid certain foods, do certain things, exercise a certain way, take these nutritional supplements. Those are the things that we do matter to matter. This instant is now somehow energy is beginning to influence matter. And it's not matter that's actually creating energy, it's energy that's creating matter. And that energetic field, that quantum field, if we change the signature in the field, we change the hologram in matter. And so there goes the tumor, there goes the Parkinson's, there goes the MS, there goes the rare genetic disorder, because the person had a moment in time that was greater than any past experience that kept them connected to the same emotional state. In other words, if the person's living by the same emotion of fear, they can think positively all they want. The thinking positively never actually makes it to the body because the body's feeling a different emotion. The mind and body are in opposition. But when the person moves into that elegant state where they're feeling the emotion of the future before it happens, the door is open in a matter of seconds for the body to literally be reprogrammed by a new mind. And now energy is instructing or informing matter in a certain way, and the instantaneous change then that's taking place is enough for the person to know without a doubt that there's been some change in their well-being. Now, getting to that point is something we could only talk around. You know, it's something that you have to overcome those unconscious thoughts that you were talking about. You have to break free of the programmed habituations and hardwired behaviors and really overcome the emotions that keep you connected to the past. Because if the emotions from past experiences are influencing your thoughts, and those thoughts are making the same chemicals for you to feel the same emotions, the redundancy of that cycle of thinking and feeling is the exact opposite. The body's believing it's in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So the body is believing it's in the same past experience, and that's the tendency for the body to be programmed genetically. So in one moment, when there's an elevated state, and that transcendental moment causes the person to have a glimpse of themselves, instead of being knocked to their lowest denominator where they can finally see themselves, pay attention to their thoughts, their behaviors and emotions, from an elevated state, a greater level of consciousness, they can look at their past and see it was perfect. Everything makes sense to them because it had to happen for them to get to this moment. And that's, I think, the moment that the past no longer exists. This elegant moment, you know, in the research that we've done, Lynn, where when we're looking at, say, a brain scan in real time, we actually can predict and induce many times that state where a person literally gets beyond themselves. They get beyond their association to all the things that they identify with that's material and known in this three-dimensional reality. In other words, they forget that they are a physical body. They forget about the people in their life. They forget about the things and the objects that they own, the place they're sitting, the place they live, the place they work. They forget about time, you know, trying to predict what's going to happen in the next moment or what happened in the past. In a sense, they dissociate from everything physical and material and become pure consciousness. And it is that moment that you can only talk around, where you finally surrender to trying to control and force an outcome. And that letting go process somehow is a moment of going from separation to a moment of connecting to a resource that we have available to us all the time. But the real question is, how much of our waking day do we put our attention on matter, on the physical world, and how much of our waking day do we put our attention on energy and information? And so teaching people how to get to that moment where they start connecting to that field, they'll have to understand a certain amount of science to be able to build the model. But the important point is they have to overcome some unconscious programming that you and I and all of us have fallen prey to. And that is that we are unconsciously conditioned into believing that our outer world, we need something from our outer world, an object, a thing, an experience, to change our inner world. And that means we're reliant on some exogenous substance or something outside of us. And so if we're reliant on something outside of us to change our internal state, by the same means, the more we react to any news in the environment, any condition in our outer world, our response to the environment can actually weaken the living organism. In other words, your frustration, your anger, your fear, your anxiety, your pain, your guilt, it's those reactions to events in our outer world that actually begin to weaken the living organism. So when a person all of a sudden is no longer responding to the conditions in their life the same way, I think that is the first step where the healing can begin to really sustain itself. Because you could have the most incredible meditation of your life and then get up and start reacting to your coworker, to your boss, to your ex, to your mother-in-law, whatever it is, to traffic, to the news, and you're back to that same personality that's connected to the same personal reality. And the environment now is constantly controlling the way a person feels and thinks. And if the environment is controlling a person's feelings and thoughts, then they are victim to their environment, and they're more prone then to anything in their environment to weaken them. So now they're more reliant on something in their environment to change their state. This is not that. This is where we reach the point where we say, the doctor told me I have 6 months to live. I'm in incredible pain. The medications aren't working. The chemotherapy's not working. The surgery didn't work. What am I left with? I'm left with myself and my belief in possibility. Now, unfortunately, this has been the path for many people where it is the wake-up call. It's the